So here's where we go. So with that as the background, that's the kind of theory that I'm thinking of in terms of. So actually, an artificial intelligence people or psychologists or statisticians will tell you the following. When I look at data or read the newspaper or look at historical data, I'm using a model that's in my head to interpret the data. So I'm doing pattern recognition, but I'm partly imposing patterns that I see. Okay, anyway. So I'm going to tell you I'm just going to tell you some history about the United States after the War of Independence. So, short story is we fought a war of independence against Great Britain. We were colonies. There were 13 colonies. They fought a terrible war against Great Britain. It was very violent. Americans won their independence. And what did that mean? It means 13 independent states won their independence. They were sovereign states. And they wrote a constitution to create the United States of America. And this constitution, called the Articles of Confederation, was our constitution for the first 10 or 15 years of our country. And this was a constitution. Now, what's a constitution? It's a description of who chooses what when. And that is extremely important because it's going to influence outcomes. So this Constitution, I think of it as, if you're an American, I think of this as Ronald Reagan's dream. It's a Constitution which has an extremely weak central government. It's a central government that cannot tax and cannot spend on its own. To tax, it requires contributions. It can ask 13 individual sovereign states for contributions, and the individual sovereign states have no incentives. It's what we call a free rider problem. Why should New York pay when it says let Massachusetts pay? This is a government that was designed so that the power to tax resides with the individual states. The one state that is the one tax that is the most powerful in those days, this was 200 years ago, is the tariff. The tariff resides in these 13 states. The power to regulate trade is in these 13 states. The power to regulate money is in these 13 states. Now, how did we finance the war against Britain? Well, the 13 states issued big debts. They borrowed. In addition, the central government borrowed. So we came out of the war with very high debt. About 2/3 of this debt is owed by the central government, which has no ability to tax, and about 1/3 is by the 13 states. The consequence is the revenues. So what determines ST? Ronald Reagan's dream. The center can't raise any revenues. So both the continental debt, the central government debt, and the state debts are going at deep discount. And I don't mean like Spanish or Italian debt. I mean 10 or 20 cents on the dollar. 10 or 20 cents on the dollar. Deep discount. So do you understand? And why? Because that bond pricing equation is working like a charm. If you're a finance guy, you say, this is great. That equation is working once more. So one little sideline, which is neglected. What about a currency union? Well, the United States actually was in a currency union in those days. With whom? With Spain. The dollar, we were using something called the Spanish dollar. That's where we got the term dollar from. It was a silver coin. And did the Spanish care whether we did this? No. Spain was a big country. We were a small, nobody cared about the United States. We were a country, we had issued debts that were denominated in Spanish dollars. They were going at deep discount. Did this concern Spain? No. Was the Spanish central bank going to bail us out? No. Did anybody think it was? No. But we were on a currency union with them. So we didn't have a fiscal union, but we had a currency union. In addition, the 13 states were printing their own currencies, all of which were going at deep discount relative to the Spanish dollar. But prices were quoted in Spanish dollars. You just had to, okay, that's the situation. Okay, so I told you the environment. It's the Articles of Confederation. The outcomes are deep discounts on IOUs. There's 14 ST processes of the, those are surplus processes, of the 13 states in the center, and they're all calling for big discounts. That's the situation. And now the question is, was there a fiscal crisis in the United States in the 1780s, from 1781, actually to 1789? Was there a fiscal crisis? It depends on who you ask. So if you were a creditor, if you were a bondholder whose bonds were going at 10 or 20 cents on the dollar, you thought there was a fiscal crisis. If you were a taxpayer, or your taxes were low, this is a government that's designed, this is the Constitution that's designed to prevent the central government from taxing, spending, or borrowing. In the United States, some Republicans say they want to starve the beast. These institutions did it. You want states' rights? This is states' rights. And that's what happened. Okay. So that's the situation. It was an equilibrium. Within, I would say this was an equilibrium within those institutions. As long as you had those institutions, these were going to be the outcomes. That's it. So now what happened was some people did not like those outcomes, the creditors of the government. And I'm going to oversimplify. And so for various reasons, two kinds of people didn't like this government. The people we now call our founding fathers. Well, they were traitors because they were sworn, they had a constitution that they were sworn to obey. It was the Articles of Confederation. And what they did is, in an underhanded way, close to a legal way, they ripped it up. That's a really interesting story. And they wrote a new constitution, but they already had one. So what they did is they changed timing protocols. They changed who decides what when in a way that I want to tell you about, because they didn't. The reason they did it is they did not like the outcomes under the Articles of Confederation. Don't think about Europe right now. Do not think about Europe. Because I told you, do not think about the things underneath that line, the red line. Okay, so there were two things the people that wrote our Constitution today did not like. They did not like the debts going at deep discount. They thought it was an insult to national integrity. We're just a government that was answering those two questions, no. We don't think government should pay its debts, and we don't think a central government should bail out the subordinate. How could it? That's a joke. The central government doesn't have any revenues. So the answers to those two questions are no. So then there's another reason some people didn't like the outcomes. So we had been in the British imperial system, just like you were until quite recently. And the Britain did favors if you were in the system, and if you were out of the system, they discriminated against your trade. So guess what? When we declared our independence, we got kicked out of the British imperial system, and they discriminated against us very heavily. They wouldn't let us. Britain was our major trading partner, even after we went out. They wouldn't let us carry our trade with them in U.S. ships, and shipping was a big industry. And they did other things. They imposed discriminatory tariffs on us. So they were really hurting us. Various Americans said we should retaliate against them. Well, the central government had no ability to retaliate because you had 13 different trade policies, and if one country, New York, tried to retaliate, as they did, another country, Pennsylvania, would say, we won't retaliate, we'll just, so there was a free rider problem there. So if you go read the Founding Fathers, they did not like that. They wanted to have the ability to retaliate. Okay, so what they did is they